Hi, this is Christiana Gaudet with more answers to your questions about tarot. Today's question comes from Lucas, and it is an interesting question. He wants to know simply, is it right to be a Christian and read tarot? The thing I would have to say is the people who feel that it is wrong to read tarot probably would not see me as a credible voice arguing for it, since I, in fact, am a tarot reader. But here's the thing, I do have a Christian background. My father was a United Methodist minister. I grew up in the church. I taught Sunday school. I sang in the choir. And I always appreciated, in the northeastern part of the United States, I always appreciated at the time when I was growing up in the 1970s, the United Methodist Church was very much a church about social consciousness. They were intellectual. They were well educated. They cared about psychology. They cared about the doctrine of love. In my house and in my church growing up, I didn't hear much talk about sin. I heard a lot of talk about love. And for me, that's what Christianity was always about. When I was in high school, I went to a born-again Christian academy. And that was the first time I really had to deal with, what people might call Bible thumpers, born-again Christians, evangelicals, charismatics. And then in the 1970s, I have to say I enjoyed the passion and the joy of the evangelical Christians. When compared with Methodism, which was really very somber, it was nice to experience joy in spirituality. So when we talk about Christianity, the thing we have to remember is there are many, many different sects of Christianity, many different denominations. What is okay in one denomination is not okay in another denomination. When we look at the reason that some Christian sects do not approve of tarot reading, we do see biblical references against it. You know where they show up. They show up in Deuteronomy, and of course they show up in Leviticus. And that's a great question when we talk about what it is to be Christian. To accept the teachings of Jesus, to accept the love of God, to accept the redemption of Jesus. Do we also have to accept the laws of the Old Testament as God's literal rules for us now in 2014? I don't believe so. I believe the Bible is a book of its times, that the lessons there are appropriate, but a lot of this, in my mind, is just archival material, not the literal word of a supreme being. But if the question is, why do some Christians believe that tarot is inappropriate, let's take a look at Leviticus 19. And it is the 26th verse going forward. Do not eat any meat with the blood still in it. Do not practice divination or sorcery. Do not cut the hair at the sides of your head or clip off the edges of your beard. Do not cut your bodies for the dead or put tattoo marks on yourself. When we talk specifically about tarot and the Bible, there is no specific mention of tarot in the Bible. There can't be. Tarot is only 500 years old. So there is one school of thought that might say that the references to witchcraft and divination, sorcery, and the occult that are in the Bible don't apply to tarot, since tarot is not specifically mentioned. I have seen that argument used. In my mind, that's a stretch. Tarot is a tool of divination. It is a tool of magic. And therefore, if you're going to talk about the occult, if you're going to talk about witchcraft, or if you're going to talk about divination, well, there tarot is. When we have this conversation about tarot and Christianity, one of the things I like to talk about is the origins of tarot, which very much reflect the Roman Catholic culture of its time. Here we have some cards from the U.S. Games reproduction of the Visconti Sforza. This is the oldest tarot that we have. And here we see what is now the High Priestess, but at the time was called the Popess, the female pope. Here we have what is now called the Hierophant, but at the time was called the Pope. Here we have another Christian reference, the Devil. And here we have the reference to the Christian Judgment Day, the card of judgment. Certainly, there are churches, there are schools of Christian thought that would prohibit any kind of sorcery or witchcraft, ergo tarot. I do believe that spirit speaks through the cards. I believe that tarot is in itself a spiritual language. I also reference the Bible. When I speak of these things, I think about the part in 1 Corinthians where St. Paul talks about the gift of prophecy. And he says, if I have the gift of prophecy but have not love, I am nothing. And so to me, I see this as a particular admonition for those of us who work with prophecy. And tarot is certainly a tool of prophecy, that we do this with love in our hearts. That's my takeaway from this. So there are churches who might forbid working with tarot or visiting a tarot reader. I can tell you that I have a number of clients who are in fact born-again Christians. I have students who are born-again Christians. I have students who see the teachings of Jesus in the major arcana of tarot. I know people, many people, for whom tarot reading and Christianity are not incompatible. There are many New Thought churches who use tarot classes and psychic fairs as fundraisers. I've been more than happy to donate my time to those kinds of events. At the end of the day, there are some people who are going to tell you that reading tarot is a terrible sin and a terrible thing. There are others who are going to tell you it is part of their Christian practice, that in studying tarot, they become closer to God. They become more able to understand the example of Christ. If you're a Christian and you feel called to tarot, you'll have to decide what you believe about it. For me, tarot has been a tool that brings me closer to my higher power. Thanks so much for your question. And if you have questions about tarot, send me an email.